North Carolina, with the misty rain that falls throughout the evening. There was a dance that night on the campus of Watts Hospital, and Jesse made his way from his parents' house to Durham to visit his girlfriend, Patricia. He wasn't supposed to have the car that night, and Detective Horn says his brother and he shared the car, and it wasn't Jesse's night, and he made a deal with his brother, and they traded days and worked it out. So at the last minute, Jesse gets the car, and he's so excited to take Pat to the dance that he even forgets the Valentine's Day chocolates that he bought for her in his rush out the door. She's at her dorm, kind of in her jammies, sort of relaxing, and she gets a call that somebody's there for her. So she goes down and she sees Jesse all ready to take her to the dance. So she rushes up, excited, gets ready really fast, and off they go. Around 11:30, Jesse and Pat left the dance, and they walked back to her dorm room so she could sign out for the night. This dorm had extended its curfew to 1 a.m. in order to accommodate for the dance. And really, that's just, I can't imagine living in dorms like that. I never did it. I really missed out on the college experience. I just went to a trade school, so anyway, this sweet young couple took off in Jesse's car, and they drove to a neighborhood. Around that time, it was the unofficial Lover's Lane for nursing students who wanted time alone to park with their partners. It was an unwritten rule around that if a cul-de-sac was taken, then you just moved on to the next one. And in fact, there were even a few couples that had their own designated unofficial spot, and the other couples would leave those open just in case the regular couple showed up that night. For Jesse and Patricia, her 1 a.m. curfew came and went, and Jesse and Patricia never came back. Saturday morning, her roommates were concerned. Pat never broke curfew. They described her as a responsible young woman who took her nursing school very seriously, and she went by the rules. And Jesse, like I said, was this good kid, and he wouldn't pressure her into doing anything against her moral code, not even skipping school. And the girls, her fellow nurses, knew this was not Pat. She would not do this, and they knew something was wrong. Her roommates start looking. They call local hospitals. Maybe there'd been a car accident. Maybe something had happened. They even filed a report with the Durham County Police Department. But then, because they couldn't sit on their hands and just wait, they got in cars. They had 2 loads of cars of people out looking for Patricia and Jesse. They hit all of the usual locations, including Lover's Lane. And here, they found Jesse's car, a Ford Durham, parked in one of the empty cul-de-sacs. The coats were on the back seat, and I found it a little strange, and then I thought about it, but there was a pair of pantyhose neatly folded under the passenger seat. Now, I know I hate pantyhose, so I probably would have taken them off as soon as I could, so then I didn't see it that strange. Nothing was in disarray, no sign of struggle, and the car was locked. Now, in those days, cars had these little tiny triangular windows that could be pushed in and out, and if it was unsecured, they could get into the car. So one of the girls was able to reach in and unlock the car to see if she could find out what was going on. But again, nothing seems out of place aside from the fact that Jesse and Pat are nowhere to be found. Now, the families of Jesse and Patricia are now fully aware that their children are missing. The local police department finally acted on things, and they start working off of the idea that maybe Jesse and investigators that something just wasn't right. And what started as a missing persons case quickly snowballed into something much worse. No one had any idea that this was actually a homicide investigation. In the podcast, there's an interview, a lot of information coming from a woman. In this podcast, there's a lot of information coming from a woman named Kellyn Spivey. She's Pat's cousin. They grew up next door to each other, and they were the best of friends. People called them twins. They were the same height. They were both left-handed. They often cut their hair the same as children. And in fact, Kellyn is why Pat pursued nursing school. They couldn't bear to be separated, and Kellyn said, "I just got the sickest feeling in my stomach that something terrible had happened." So, for nearly 2 weeks, the police and search parties made up of concerned locals worked the area. Investigators followed up every single lead they could find, but constantly came up empty. The rumors swirled all over town. In fact, Kellyn remembered sitting in the doctor's office, listening to strangers talk about the case, because they had no clue who she was. Can you imagine that? You're sitting there minding your own business, and you start hearing people talk about your missing family member. The town of Durham went on high alert. No one walked around alone. Everyone locked their doors. The nursing students didn't use the tunnels to travel to the hospital. And on Thursday, February 25th, 1971, 12 days after the couple went missing, a surveyor working in a heavily wooded area on a one-lane dirt road sees what he believes is the pieces of a mannequin, a leg sticking out of a pile of leaves, and when he gets closer, he realizes it's not a mannequin, it's a body. He immediately calls the police, and by the end of the day, Jesse McBane and Patricia Mann are officially identified. It actually hit the news before the families were notified. Kellyn got a phone call while she was cooking dinner for her family, and she was completely floored because someone called her and was like, "Hey, I heard that they found Pat's body." Like, wait, what? I'm sorry, why didn't I hear from authorities? But this is where it gets really weird, guys. The couple had been tied to a tree, their backs to the bark. Their hands were tied backwards with thick rope. There was rope around their head and necks, and though they'd been secured to the tree, their bodies had slumped forward and down, leaving them side by side and covered with leaves. Jesse was still wearing his class ring and his watch. His car keys were in his pocket, and he had $4 and some change in his other pocket. Pat still had her promise ring on her finger, so it was quickly determined that this was not a robbery. The medical examiner found no evidence of sexual assault. Patricia did have internal injuries from being punched, kicked, or stomped on. Furthermore, there were multiple strangulation marks around their necks. This suggested to the medical examiner that the rope had been tightened and loosened and tightened and loosened over and over again. It looked like they had been strangled and let down and strangled and let down over a period of time, to the point where the shoes had mud on them and there were little troughs in the dirt where their feet had been thrashing around. Detective Horn said, "This involved a certain degree of planning, absolutely. There's a strong possibility, we do believe, that the suspects, one of them at least, of this young couple was straight up torture. Their funerals were on the same day in different cities. Both churches were filled to capacity, and in fact, her cousin Carolyn's husband Dave, they all used to double date, and he was like a pallbearer in Jesse's wedding, and he had to, I might be getting this backwards, but he had to run from one funeral to the other to make it in time. The area where Jesse and Pat were found was also a lover's lane. It was a road that had been pushed in, and there was a cul-de-sac at the end. It was about a quarter-mile into the woods and very secluded. The ground was littered with cigarette butts and beer bottles, and people went there to drink, smoke, and fool around. It was located right on the county line between Orange County and Durham. An extensive investigation began between multiple agencies, including the Orange County Sheriff's Department, the Durham Police Department, the SBI, and the FBI. As Detective Horn put it, there was a lack of collaboration between all of the different law enforcement at the time. Everybody individually worked on the case, but it didn't catch a whole lot of traction. There was a lot of work done, but not a lot of information was being shared by the various agencies. So there were some missed opportunities. Through the chaos, though, there were a couple of decent suspects. Some of them cleared by polygraphs, others failed. One in particular was a doctor at Watts Hospital who worked with Patricia. He repeatedly refused to cooperate with law enforcement, which cast him in a pretty suspicious light. This doctor was the focus in 1971, and Detective Horn says he's still the focus today. But no one ever really zeroed in on any of the suspects, and the case went cold. Now, in 2010, former Orange County Sheriff Lindy Pendergrass asked Detective Horn to take measurements in a room at the old jail for a potential renovation project. Dozens of cardboard boxes stacked in rows 3 and 4 feet high filled this room, and sitting on the floor by itself was one such box with its lid off. This is how Detective Horn found this case. He moved to replace the lid, and he saw the gruesome crime scene photographs of Patricia Mann and Jesse McBane. He was intrigued, and he took the box with him to his office and began to sift through the information. It didn't take long for the story to jump off the page and into his mind. It had so many twists and turns that it was easy to get caught up in it, he said. Everyone who has had the opportunity to read this case file or be a part of this investigation has felt the same way. You couldn't put it down. It was like a book or a Hollywood screenplay. He shared this find with fellow Orange County Detective Dawn Hunter, who had recently joined the force after several years with the Chapel Hill Police Department. After a few pages, she was hooked as well. And for about 6 months, the duo worked in their free time and off-duty to piece this case file together. Rubber bands had been broken, paper clips had been taken off, pages were out of order, the file was a mess and thrown into a box to get dusty. Once they got it back together, they each made a copy and compared notes. Detective Hunter said we'd go home every night and call each other and tell each other what we'd found. Detective Horn asked Sheriff Pendergrass, who was a police officer in Chapel Hill at the time of the murder, if he could reopen this case. He reached out to other agencies that were involved in the initial investigation and requested their case files, and soon he had detective notes from the SBI and the Durham police. After almost 40 years, Detective Horn and Dawn Hunter became the first investigators to see the original investigators, still alive, got phone calls from Horn and Hunter, who asked them to come down to the sheriff's office and go over the case details with them. Detective Horn put on a presentation. He gave out all the evidence he had, and there was silence in the room. Most of the information he presented was new to some or all of the investigators because the different agencies investigating this had not shared their information, and if they had, Detective Horn really believes it would have made a difference. The only suspect still alive, the doctor from Watts Hospital. Detective Horn won't say exactly why he's a suspect, but shares that when the original investigators asked him to take a polygraph, he called his lawyer and declined. Nearly 50 years later, Detective Horn asked the doctor to provide a DNA sample, and he called his lawyer and declined. And though it's been decades, Detective Horn really believes he can close this case, and he believes he's going to do it with DNA. There's a system called an MVAC. It's kind of described like a wet vacuum DNA collection system, and it can extract DNA from difficult places. Say like the knotted ropes used to tie up and strangle Jesse and Patricia. There are only 80 MVAC machines in the world, and the United States has 40 of them, including one that belongs in Guilford County, North Carolina. Detective Horn puts it to use. He said, "This is a horrible tragedy, especially for young kids just starting out their life, to be kidnapped and abducted from a lover's lane, transported to a different lover's lane, marched up a small embankment, bound and tied to a tree, and then strangled. We believe, and we've had a lot of consultants look at this, everybody's in agreement. Somewhere on this rope, you're gonna have a suspect's profile, and this new technique is the best one to obtain that DNA." Unfortunately, as I researched, the MVAC was unable to get enough genetic material for a comparison, and Detective Horn had to deliver this news to the victims' families. He said, "It's just another hurdle. It's not going to stop us. We're going to continue to pursue this case. Unfortunately, we now have to take a break from the testing aspect and let the technology advance a little more. Time is of the essence because the suspect is already over 80 years old. There's a race between us trying to solve it and bring someone to justice, and if it ends up being this particular suspect, I don't know how many more years he has left." I really was sad. I was excited when I saw that they were doing the MVAC, and then I was like, okay, let's find out if they got anything, because still no one's been arrested, but they didn't find anything. Now, they did, Detective Horn retired, so I know he put it off in order to work on this case, but he did also join forces with investigative journalist Eric Pruitt and a crime novelist to work on the podcast, The Long Dance. And he said, "We were never able to get all of the information out to the public before, and it may jar someone's memory, so the podcast puts out our hopes, and we certainly hope we get more information back from potential witnesses." He hopes that this podcast can answer questions and squash some rumors about their murders. Now, among those people that were interviewed for this podcast, and I've only listened to the first episode, they interviewed the prime suspect. Eric Pruitt said, "It was chilling. I've never been in the room with someone like that. Time will tell, guilt or innocence, etc. But this was a cold person." absolutely crazy to me that they interviewed this person. The murders of Jesse McBane and Patricia Mann are still an open and active investigation. Anyone with information about these murders should call the Orange County Sheriff's Office at 919-644-3050, and I will put that number in the description box down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I was absolutely swept up in the details of this case, and I just literally have not had time to listen to the rest of the podcast because I cannot listen to podcasts and stuff at work, and I have an old car, so I can't listen to stuff like that in my car. I tried to get the Amazon Echo Auto thing, and it won't connect with my car, so yeah. Yep, my car's old. Anyway, sorry, I drifted. I think this case is so sad. I discovered it because I found a list of like 10 Lovers Lane murders or something like that, and I was like, oh, a Valentine's Day special. And this one seemed to me like I'm always looking for some kind of connection, and I connect with nursing students. I work in the medical field, so that got me on an emotional level. And then listening to the podcast with her cousin talking and everyone talking about all this, I got emotionally involved in this case, and I really wanted to share it with you guys, and I probably would have regardless of it being Valentine's Day and the two of them attending the Valentine's dance. I am so sad that their lives ended in this unnecessary way, and I think it was probably absolutely terrible for them. And I imagine Jesse just being devastated that he couldn't help Pat, and I can't imagine watching something like that or experiencing something like that, and I just hope that their families get some answers. It's been like 40 years. Well, it's been 40 years. I hope for some closure for these families. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you don't